everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Kayleigh McEnany. And here's where we begin with President Trump and Elon Musk sitting down for an exclusive joint interview with Sean Hannity. They discussed a wide range of topics, but a focus of the night was Musk's Department of Government efficiency. He defended the way the DOGE agenda as a way to implement President Trump's executive actions. It was very interesting, that point specifically. And he assured American voters that they will have their voices heard.
The president will make these executive orders, which are very sensible and good for the country, but then they don't get implemented, you know?
He said, you know, when you sign these executive orders, a lot of them don't get done, and maybe the most important ones. And he would take that executive order that I'd sign, and he would have those people go to whatever agency it was. When are you doing it? Get it done, get it done. And some guy that maybe didn't want to do it, all of a sudden, he's signing. He just doesn't want to be bothered.
It's a real dynamic, and one that the American people should be concerned about and quite glad about that Elon Musk is trying to rectify. And President Trump went on to defend his relationship with Musk. He claims that the media is actively working against them both.
They have many different things of hatred. Actually, Elon called me. He said, you know, they're trying to drive us apart. I said, absolutely. No, they said, we have breaking news. Donald Trump has ceded control of the presidency to Elon Musk. President Musk will be attending a cabinet meeting tonight at 8 o'clock. And I say, it's just so obvious. They're so bad at it. I used to think they were good at it. They're actually bad at it, because if they were good at it, I'd never be president.
So one of the points that was driven home was President Trump will sign an executive order. Then it goes to its respective agency to be enforced, but there's not always that enforcing. In fact, sometimes there is active undermining. He went on to say that Elon Musk is the guy who goes in, hammers it, makes sure that the civil service, the bureaucracy, puts the president's vision in place. And Bill, I want to pull up this Washington Post quote, because this is what it reminded me of. This was 2017. So the first term, resistance from within. Federal workers push back against Trump. Listen to this. Less than 2 weeks into Trump's administration, this was first term, federal workers are in regular consultation with recently departed Obama-era political appointees about what they can do to push back against the new president's initiatives. That was the first time President Trump said, nope, not this time around.
Well, very interesting. With regard to his comment about telling Elon to go ahead and get it done, and he gets it done, this just crossed 30 minutes ago. The Trump empowered Musk to explore drastic options to prod Boeing to move faster on getting the 2 new Air Force One jets delivered. He referred to that last night and was like, what are we waiting on? So, I mean, this is his way of getting it done. Here's what I thought was so intriguing about last night. I'm sitting at home. I'm dying to see a 3-shot. I'm dying to see a 2-shot. I wanted to really understand the dynamics of the relationship between these two men. And I wanted to know if it was genuine, if it was real. I think what we saw last night are two guys that are really in sync with one another. And you can ask yourself, how long does it last? But for right now, you know, what are you, 29 days after the inauguration? Tomorrow's 1 month since January 20th. I mean, right now, I think that interview last night, Sean, really opened up the door and showed us how these men get along. I don't want to say they were completing their sentences, ladies, but they came pretty close last night.
Yeah, very much in sync. You know, one of the interesting dynamics that Elon explained was democracy. And, you know, we've heard that the slogan for Biden and for Harris was threat to democracy. Trump's such a threat to democracy. Well, Elon Musk kind of flipped that on his head and asked if this is truly democracy when the president's being undermined. Watch.
There's a vast federal bureaucracy that is implacably opposed to the president and the cabinet. And you look at, say, D.C. voting, it's 92% Kamala. Okay, so we're 92% Kamala. That's a lot. I think about that number a lot. And like 92%, that's basically almost everyone. Yeah. And so, how can you, if the will of the president is not implemented, and the president is representative of the people, that means the will of the people is not being implemented. And that means we don't live in a democracy, we live in a bureaucracy.
I mean, that was really interesting framing, Harris.
Yeah, you know, there were times during the interview where I forgot that this was what it was. It was Elon Musk proving how he's gotten to be Elon Musk. I mean, just that moment right there, how he can just take it down to the bare minimum and explain something so people get it when he's putting, you know, rockets in the sky and everything else. And it really drilled home, to piggyback on what you were saying a little bit, Bill, not just about their relationship. It was much less paternal than I thought it might have been. No, they were talking as equal business titans. They were talking about a vision for America, and it was positive. It was forward moving. It was everything the last administration couldn't do, and still what liberals, Democrats on Capitol Hill have yet to prove that they can do, to take America forward. It doesn't need a nickname necessarily. You could just be successful to the left. What you see there is success with a vision.
And on the note of what made Elon Musk, you know, he has SpaceX, he has Tesla, he has all of these ventures. But there was this moment where anyone who didn't know what Elon Musk was about, I think, figured it out. Listen to his description of what he is doing with Neuralink, literally helping people to walk, helping the blind to see. Watch.
We've implanted Neuralink in 3 patients so far who are quadriplegics, and it allows them to directly control their phone and computer just using their mind, just by thinking. It's like, so we call this product telepathy. So you control your computer and phone just by thinking, and it's possible to actually control the computer and phone faster than someone who has working hands. Then the next step would be to add a second Neuralink implant past the point where the neurons are damaged, so that somebody can walk again, and so they can have full body functionality restored.
Wow.
You know, Emily, helping blind people to see, that's the kind of guy I would want to enlist to better the federal government.
Of course. Look, here's the thing. When we talk about the characterization of this and what was important here, the authenticity is what rang so deeply. And we talked about this a bit before the show, Bill, that the authenticity, the genuinity of their relationship is very apparent. That's not something that you can fake, no matter how hard the prior administration, for example, tried between the president and the vice president, for example. And that synergy and that relationship, that strength matters, because in Elon Musk's position in his role as the executor of DOGE and implementing the president's will, well, that's the will of the people. That's why to thwart it, to resist it, is resisting the will of the people. And yet it was portrayed as comedy. Politico, in fact, called it comedy on Fox. They said that critics called it farcical, fawning, and utterly news-free. And I wonder what is news-free about the long list of the horrific expenditures our tax dollars have gone to. They called it toe-curling at times when Sean was asking about the authenticity of the relationship. And I wonder, you know, when you contrast that with the portrayal of the media and the prior administration, for example, are you close with the president? Do you love the vice president? And the questions that picked at their authenticity or lack thereof of their relationship, why isn't this in the best interest of the American people to know that the allegiance, first and foremost, is to the Constitution, the will of the people, and then to implementing the president's decisions as reflected by the will of the people. So to me, I found it utterly newsworthy, because that is exactly the hallmark that DOGE and the relationship rests on.
Yeah, you mentioned the criticisms from the media. This was an interesting point Trump made. I think it speaks to the different time we are in now versus 2017. The media has in many ways been rendered irrelevant. Watch.
I think nobody in history has ever gotten more bad publicity than me. I could do the greatest things. I get 98% bad publicity. I could do, outside of you and a few of your very good friends, it's like the craziest thing. But you know what I have learned, Elon? The people are smart. They get it.
Yeah, they do, actually.
They get it. They really see what's happening.
Bill, on the note about the people being smart and getting it, you just have to look at polls that quantify that. Trafalgar, 54% approval, 53% approval, CBS. You really get the sense the media is piercing through what the media is saying.
Yeah. I would also suggest those polls are pretty much in favor of what they're trying to do here. I'm going to emphasize we're in the very early stages of all of this. And how much they're able to save, we don't know. Last night, Musk said, but no, in January, he said $2 trillion. Last night, he said you gun for $2 trillion, then you hope you get $1 trillion. If they were able to get close to that, I mean, that would be quite remarkable. I'll make 2 other points. Last night, when Musk said that he wasn't always going to support Trump, but came around during the campaign, and then when the assassination attempt hit in Butler, Pennsylvania, I think it was that night, because we were all in Milwaukee. It might have been the next day, I'm not quite sure, based on the timing, when he came out and put his support behind President Trump on X. With regard to the president, he doesn't have to share this hour of TV with anyone. And just the fact that he did shows us that he's gracious and he respects Musk. And that may portend good things for this relationship and also the eventual outcome that they want to achieve.
Well, and it also speaks to the issue that he doesn't care what the haters are saying. They're
Yeah.
going forward.
Yep, and I mean, to the haters, you have the most powerful man in the world and the richest man in the world coming together to work on behalf of the American people. What could be better than that?